How exciting it is to be with you this morning. I would especially like to thank Reverend Sean and Reverend Lynn for their invitation. It's a rare treat to be sitting in one country and preaching in another. I guess maybe that's the silver lining for all this distance we've been practicing. It was the possibility of jointly producing a service on both sides of our border that inspired this morning's service and sermon. The folks in the church that I serve will tell you I'm a bit of a history buff. And I considered what I might talk about today. The transnational relationship between Canada and the States was, of course, central to my mind. And that brought me to our geography. Ohio and Ontario are neighbors, and we have more in common than just Lake Erie. We have a wonderful shared history of people inspired by their faith and a desire for freedom, a shared story in the Underground Railroad. Most students in the States learn at least a little something about the Underground Railroad. We learned that Harriet Tubman was an escaped slave who helped hundreds of others escape to freedom. We learn of the Fugitive Slave Act and the need for freed slaves to go north. We know they often went to Ohio or my home state, Michigan, and then on to Canada. And that's kind of where our knowledge ends, at the border, at the water. History is often like this. We learn the part of the story that's most germane to us, and the rest just sort of fades away. But of course, people came to your shores and set up lives for themselves. Harriet Tubman herself had a home in St. Catharines in the 1850s. On a trip as volunteers with some senior citizens out of Port Huron, Michigan, where my parents live, which is of course right across the St. Clair from Sarnia, my mom and dad visited the Tubman house. And when I told my mom about this morning's sermon, she recalled her trip very fondly and remembered being very impressed by the sight. The story doesn't go just one way, though, does it? No, it's not just a story of people fleeing slavery and landing in the safe shores of Ontario. And one of the greatest tools of the American efforts of abolition was inspired by a man living in Dresden, Ontario, a man named Josiah Henson. Mr. Henson met a Unitarian woman named Harriet Beecher Stowe. Stowe had met Henson in Andover, Massachusetts, in her home, in her parlor. Inspired by both Mr. Henson's story and the way her own Unitarian faith called her to work for abolition, Stowe wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. Mr. Henson wrote about the release of Stowe's book the following words: "When this novel of Mrs. Stowe came out, it shook the foundations of the world. It shook the Americans out of their shoes and out of their shirts. It left some of them on the sandbar barefooted and scratching their heads. So they came to the conclusion that the whole thing must be a fabrication." Mr. Henson met with Mrs. Stowe on one of his trips back to the United States in the service of abolition and freeing individual people and from the evils of slavery. Mr. Henson made dangerous returns to the States, guiding 118 other people to freedom. Mr. Henson, with the aid of Samuel Atkins Eliot, penned his own biography called The Life of Josiah Henson, formerly a slave, now an inhabitant of Canada, as narrated by himself. It was published in 1849. Samuel Atkins Eliot would in his lifetime become both the mayor of the city of Boston and a representative to the state of Massachusetts. He came from a prominent family, and his grandson, the Reverend Samuel Eliot, served the American Unitarian Association from 1898 to 1927 as its president. Now, not all the Unitarians in the story were on the leading edge of history in this question of slavery in the United States. I'm sorry to report that President Millard Fillmore, in what would be called a flawed attempt to preserve the Union of the United States, signed the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850, which allowed bounty hunters to pursue escaped slaves north, up into the free states to be returned to their owners. The bounty hunters, not surprisingly, were more interested in profit than ethics, and there are many tales of free Blacks being erroneously returned to slavery. Solomon Northrop's book, 12 Years a Slave from 1853, was made into the movie in 2013, and that's just one example of this appalling reality. Being from Ohio, at least for now, I would be remiss, I think, in not mentioning John Brown. John Brown was an abolitionist, since he felt called by God to strike down the unholy institution of slavery. While Brown was not born here in Ohio, he grew up in a little town called Hudson, Ohio. And my husband and I just visited just a couple of weeks ago because we're so close to where we live. In fact, we live between the city of Hudson and the city of Oberlin, where Reverend Sean went to college. Oberlin is another famous Underground Railroad city in Ohio. It was in the Congregational Church in Hudson where John Brown made his public declaration of his war on slavery during a meeting. John's father, Owen Brown, was a leading figure in Hudson and operated a station of the Underground Railroad himself. John Brown's attack on Harper's Ferry is often cited as one of the catalysts for the secession of the Southern states and thereby the creation of two nations, the United States of America and the Confederate States of America. In essence, for a time, passengers along the Underground Railroad had to pass through three sovereign nations to freedom. This morning, I requested the song Follow the Drinking Gourd, so well done by Gabby, because it's just one example of songs that were used to guide people along the Underground Railroad to freedom. According to some scholars, the song contains directions for escape from the deep south to Canada. When the sun comes back and the first quail calls, follow the drinking gourd. The old man is awaiting to carry you to freedom. Follow the drinking gourd. Now the river bank makes a mighty good road. The dead trees will show you the way. Left peg foot, traveling on, follow the drinking gourd. Now the river ends between two hills. There's another river on the other side. Follow the drinking gourd, for the old man is waiting to carry you to freedom. Without diving too deeply into the lyrics of the song teaches those who know it when the best time to leave is. When the first quail calls is the springtime. The river bank refers to the Tombigbee River, which leads north from northern Mississippi. Markings left in a dead tree by a man named Peg-Leg Joe helped you find your way. And the river ending between two hills are the directions to the Ohio River. Once over the Ohio River, an escaping slave was, until the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, was safe. Along the whole way, you follow with a drinking gourd, the Big Dipper, which points its way north to freedom, to Canada. Which brings me back to Ontario. In Ontario, there are several communities of former slaves that have thrived. Places like Amherstburg, Chatham, London, Oro, Woolwich, and Windsor. Others have crossed the Great Lakes to freedom and made their homes in Owen Sound in Toronto. In each of these stories, some more famous than others, the people involved in the Underground Railroad, people's understanding of God, called them to duty. Some of them, histories, have only been captured, and there's a snippet of a whole life. Earlier, Reverend Sean read just 3 entries of people he helped, that Mr. Wills helped across the Underground Railroad to freedom. Mr. William Still was determined to tell the stories of the people who, to quote him, had the determination toward liberty even at the cost of life. It would be hard, if not impossible, for many of us to dream, to really imagine the kind of faith it would take to run from the only home you may have ever known, even though it be an unhappy home, into the dark of night and into the unknown. To know that you would need to hide from slave catchers, to know you would need to find food on the way, to know that there was really no established path, no paved and marked roads for you to follow. I believe it's impossible for us today to imagine what making a choice like that might be. A choice to leave, how hard it must have been. It took courage and probably desperation. And I have no doubt it took faith. Faith that there could be help along the way to help you, or at the very least, folks who turn a blind eye to you as you made your way to freedom. I invite you just for a moment to imagine to contemplate taking a journey, walking some 1,250 kilometers of unknown and potentially hostile territory for the hope of a better life. That is the distance between Montgomery, Alabama, and Cleveland, Ohio. Imagine facing such a dangerous journey. It's a journey few of us would contemplate in the best of times. And yet, even today, there are refugees worldwide who are forced into this kind of decision. And this journey is and was undertaken. More often than not, the journey is not completed successfully, heartbreakingly often. But sometimes the journey was completed, and with great joy. Families united, new families created, and generations to follow. All of these journeys, those that reached the goal of freedom and those that were not able to, were assisted by the faith of the people. The individual who was bold enough to begin had to have faith. The people of the Underground Railroad, the conductors, the station masters, those providing safe houses and depots, each of them working by what they understood to be the moral path. Each of these paths taught to them by their faith. When we consider our actions today, we think about the meetings we go to, or the protests, or the rallies, when we hold vigils or deep and sometimes uncomfortable conversations in the service, we hope, of creating a world more just and more fair for all, a world of possibilities for the children that we love, biological or not, we are tapping into that same well of faith, even if it be called by different names. As your co-religionist, your cousin of faith from across this friendly border we share, I hope that we remember, no matter what borders seem to separate us, we are all one humanity, one family in our faith, ever relying on each other, ever inspiring one another. May our mutual admiration, affection, and efforts truly transform the world.